It started with a plain white envelope. No address, no name. Just a crease down the middle and a faint smudge of ink where the corner had caught on something damp. I found it tucked into the stack of junk mail on the kitchen counter. As unassuming as a receipt. I might have ignored it entirely, but something about the way it was placed, deliberate, almost demanding, made me stop. My husband, Greg, wasn't careless about our mail. He liked order systems plans. That was one of the reasons I married him. I thought he'd keep me grounded, balanced. I slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife, the blade gliding smoothly through the paper. Inside there was a single Polaroid. My breath caught as I tilted it into the light. It was Greg. And her. Her face wasn't clear, just a blur of dark curls and crimson lipstick as she leaned into him. But Greg's expression, God, that was clear as day. His arm around her waist, his mouth pressed to her cheek, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the act itself that gutted me, not yet. It was the realization that someone else knew. Someone had watched my husband with this stranger, captured it, and decided to send the evidence to me. Why? That question pulsed in my mind like a migraine. Who would do this? Who could have gotten close enough to take the photo? And why the hell would they want me to see it? Greg walked in at that moment, whistling some tune he must have heard on the radio. I dropped the photo back into the envelope and shoved it deep into my pocket. Hey babe, he said, leaning in for a kiss. His lips brushed mine, warm and familiar but suddenly foreign. Dinner smells amazing. I swallowed hard, the words thick in my throat. It's just spaghetti. He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. He never noticed much, really. And maybe that's how this started. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't stop glancing at him. The way he twirled his fork, the faint creases around his eyes when he smiled. It was all so maddeningly normal. Was this a game to him? A charade he played every night while slipping away to her? Later, as Greg settled onto the couch with his laptop, I excused myself to the bedroom. I had to know more. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, my hands trembling as I tipped it upside down, hoping for another clue. Something else slid out. A torn corner of hotel stationery with 3 words scrawled across it. Check the drawer. The note's 3 words might as well have been a riddle etched in stone. I stared at them, the meaning twisting and turning in my mind. My breath felt shallow as the walls of our bedroom seemed to close in around me. What drawer? Which drawer? There were dozens in our house. The kitchen, the office, his workshop in the garage. All of them filled with Greg's meticulous clutter. Tools, receipts, chargers for devices we didn't use anymore. But something told me this wasn't about any of those. This was personal. It had to be. I glanced at our nightstand. Greg's side was always neatly arranged, with a clock radio, a half-empty glass of water, and a charging dock for his phone. My side was messy. Books stacked precariously, my journal tucked beneath a bottle of hand lotion. But it was his drawer I found myself reaching for, my fingers hesitating over the smooth, wooden handle. What if I found nothing? What if I found everything? I pulled it open. First, I was almost relieved. Socks. A jumble of receipts. Loose change. Greg was a creature of habit, and it looked like the usual assortment of nothing. But then I noticed something beneath the neatly folded socks. A small black leather-bound planner. Greg never used a planner. He swore by his phone for scheduling. My heart pounded as I pulled it out, the leather cool and supple against my fingertips. The moment I flipped it open, I knew I'd been right to feel uneasy. Inside, the pages weren't filled with appointments or reminders. Instead, there were dates, dozens of them, written in neat black ink. Beside some of the entries were initials, CW, LM, and JA. Others were simply marked with cryptic symbols. Hearts, stars, or circles. I felt like I was drowning in the silence of the room. What the hell was this? I scanned the pages, looking for any detail that would explain the entries. Halfway through I froze. A date stared back at me, June 16th. Last week. My birthday. Next to it, a small heart and the letters AS. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick and heavy. Greg had been working late that night, or so he'd said. Big project, he'd explained, kissing my cheek as he left the house. Now I couldn't stop picturing him with S. Whoever the hell that was, smiling and carefree, while I'd sat alone with takeout and a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Before I could process any further, I heard Greg's footsteps in the hallway. My body reacted instinctively, shoving the planner back into the drawer and sliding it shut. I barely had time to compose myself before he poked his head into the room. "Hey," he said, his tone casual. "What are you up to?" I forced a smile, my hands trembling slightly. "Just looking for my headphones," I lied, gesturing vaguely toward the nightstand. "Need help?" he offered, stepping closer. "No," I said too quickly. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I softened my tone. "No, I'm good. Found them." I grabbed the nearest pair of earbuds from the bedside table and held them up like a trophy. He grinned, apparently satisfied. "Cool. I'm gonna grab a beer. Want anything?" I shook my head, my throat too dry to form words. As he left the room, I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. I had to confront him. I had to know what those dates, initials, and symbols meant. But how? If I came at him directly, he'd either deny everything or gaslight me into thinking I was imagining it. No, I needed proof. That's when I remembered the Polaroid. And the note. Someone else already knew. Someone was trying to help me catch him. Whoever they were, they had my attention. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the initials in Greg's planner danced in front of me like taunting ghosts. Who was she? What did the symbols mean? And who had sent me the Polaroid? Around 3 a.m. I gave up on sleep altogether. The house was quiet, and Greg's steady breathing filled the space. I slipped out of bed as silently as I could, the planner burning a hole in my mind. But this time I didn't go for the nightstand. Instead, I grabbed the Polaroid and the note and made my way downstairs. The kitchen light cast an eerie glow over the room as I placed both items on the table, staring at them like they might speak if I waited long enough. I turned the photo over, hoping to find something written on the back. There was nothing but the faint smudge of fingerprints. Then I saw it. A watermark on the edge of the Polaroid. Faint but legible, Metroprint Labs. A quick search on my phone confirmed that Metroprint Labs was a small photo development shop in the city. The kind of place that catered to people who still swore by film cameras. I stared at the address on the screen, my pulse quickening. This was something tangible. Something real. The next morning, Greg left early for work, just as he always did. He kissed me on the forehead, his lips warm against my skin, and for a brief moment, I hated how easily my body reacted to him. How could he still feel like home when I'd seen him holding someone else? The moment his car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my keys. The drive to the city felt like a blur, my mind a haze of questions and half-formed suspicions. I parked outside Metroprint Labs, a modest brick building sandwiched between a bakery and a laundromat. The shop smelled faintly of chemicals and old paper. A young man with a patchy beard and a name tag that read Elliot greeted me with a distracted smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, flipping through a stack of envelopes behind the counter. I pulled out the Polaroid and slid it across the counter. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about this." Elliot picked up the photo, squinting at it. Yeah, this is definitely one of ours. We don't see a ton of Polaroid orders these days, though. You sure this came from us?" I pointed to the watermark. "It's right there." "All right. Yeah, that's ours." He glanced up at me, his brow furrowed. "What's this about?" I hesitated. "It's personal. I think someone dropped this off here recently. Do you keep records?" He shrugged, tapping at the keyboard of an ancient computer. "Yeah, but only for about a month. You got lucky, we just started digitizing the old orders. Let's see." I held my breath as he typed. His fingers paused and he leaned closer to the screen. "Here we go," he said. "This one was part of a set. Brought in about 2 weeks ago." "By who?" I asked, my voice sharp. He frowned. "Sorry, I can't give out customer info. Privacy policy." I felt my frustration bubble over. "Please. This is important. It's about my husband." Elliot sighed, glancing around like he was about to commit a crime. "Okay, look. I shouldn't do this, but..." He turned the screen toward me, pointing to a name. Chelsea Wright. The name was unfamiliar, but my heart dropped all the same. The initials matched one of the entries in Greg's planner. CW. "Did she leave any contact info?" I pressed. He shook his head. "No, but... wait a second." He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a second envelope. "She didn't pick up the rest of her prints." I was about to throw them out. My stomach clenched as he handed me the envelope. Inside, there were at least a dozen more Polaroids, each more damning than the last. Greg and the woman Chelsea, at a dimly lit bar, holding hands in a park, kissing in front of what looked like a hotel room door. I shoved the photos back into the envelope, my hands shaking. "Thank you," I murmured, turning to leave. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "We need to talk. Tonight. 8 p.m. I'll send the address." No name. No context. Just the weight of inevitability hanging over those 7 words. The hours crawled by, each one a fresh layer of anxiety building in my chest. I spent the day staring at the unknown number's message, trying to dissect its intent. Was this the person who had sent me the Polaroid? Was it Chelsea? Someone else entirely? At 7:30 p.m. I left the house. Greg wouldn't be home for hours, as he'd mentioned a late meeting that morning. The irony of it stung. A meeting, sure. Maybe with AS or CW, or whoever else was scrawled in that planner. The address led me to an unfamiliar part of town, a neighborhood that hovered between gentrification and decay. The building was an old diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. I parked across the street, hesitating for a long moment before stepping out of the car. The streetlights hummed above me, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked pavement. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A lone waitress leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone. In the corner booth, a woman sat alone, her face partially obscured by the brim of a wide hat. She looked up as I entered, and our eyes locked. It was her. Chelsea Wright. I knew it instantly. Her dark curls framed a sharp, confident face, but her expression was guarded, wary. She gestured for me to sit. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the room and slid into the booth opposite her. "You're Chelsea," I said, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of coffee. "And you're Greg's wife." Her bluntness hit me like a slap. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, the words trembling with anger. She didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table between us. "This isn't about what I want," she said quietly. "It's about what you deserve to know." I stared at the folder, my hands frozen at my sides. Finally, I forced myself to reach for it. Inside were more photos, emails, and printed text messages. Some were between Greg and Chelsea. Others were with different women, ASLM, and several others whose initials now made sickening sense. "I'm not the only one," Chelsea said, her voice tinged with both anger and regret. "Greg's been doing this for years. He has a pattern. He finds someone new, sweeps them off their feet, makes them feel special, and then he moves on." I fell for it just like the rest. My chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" "Because I didn't know he was married," she said, her tone sharp. "Not until a few months ago when I saw your photo in his wallet. He told me you were separated, that he was only staying for appearances. But it didn't add up." Her words sank like stones in my gut. "And the Polaroid? The note?" I asked. "That wasn't me," Chelsea admitted. "I don't know who sent it. But when I saw it, I knew I had to tell you the truth." My mind reeled. If Chelsea wasn't the one leaving breadcrumbs, then who was? Before I could ask, Chelsea spoke again. "You should know Greg's been hiding money. Offshore accounts, shell companies. I found out when I started digging into his life. If you're going to confront him, you need to protect yourself. He's not the man you think he is." I returned home that night armed with the folder and a storm of emotions I could barely contain. Greg was in the kitchen when I walked in, casually pouring himself a glass of wine. "Hey babe," he said, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I threw the folder onto the counter. The papers spilled out, the photos and messages scattering like confetti. Greg froze, his smile fading into something cold and calculating. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low. "You tell me." I shot back, my tone venomous. "How long, Greg? How many women? Or is it easier for you to count the ones you haven't slept with?" His jaw tightened, a flicker of something, panic maybe, crossing his face. But then his expression hardened, and he folded his arms. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're letting someone mess with your head. You can't trust any of this." I laughed bitterly. "Really? Then why do all the initials match your little planner? He blinked, caught off guard. You went through my things? He said, his voice rising. Don't, I warned, pointing a finger at him. Don't you dare make this about me. You lied. You cheated. You betrayed everything we built. Greg opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. I know about the money too, I said, my voice shaking. Chelsea told me everything. You think you're so clever hiding it all. But you're not as untouchable as you think. His face went pale. For the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. You don't understand, he said, his tone almost pleading. It's more complicated than you think. It always is, I snapped. But I don't care. I'm done, Greg. I'm done with your lies, your manipulation. You can keep your planner and your secrets, but you can't keep me. The divorce was messy, as I knew it would be. Greg tried to spin the narrative, painting me as unstable, vindictive. But Chelsea's evidence, combined with records from his hidden accounts, made his lies unravel. In the end, he lost everything he cared about, his reputation, his money, and the control he'd always wielded so effortlessly. As for me, it wasn't easy to rebuild. Trust felt like a foreign language, something I had to relearn. But with time I did. And as painful as the betrayal was, it gave me something invaluable, the strength to demand better for myself, for my future. I never found out who sent the Polaroid. But maybe that was the point. A stranger had opened my eyes when I couldn't see the truth for myself. And for that, I'll always be grateful.